Yes, we are.
All right, going live.
Okay. Welcome to the November 16th, 2021 American Rescue Plan Act Committee. This is our third meeting now, I think officially, our second in these chambers. So if we could take a roll, I guess I will do that. Misha? Here. Is your mic on? Or just for the record?
Yeah.
Scott?
Here.
John Rogers?
Here.
Here. And Troy? No Troy. So we do not have Troy today, but we do have our consultants, our legal consultants from Barnes and Thornburg. And thank you both for being here, Jake German, Dustin Meeks.
Absolutely.
And I'm going to go through a few things before I put you guys into your presentation. Just for the committee's note, the appropriation for our funds that we already received, as well as the template for our spending plan, we had introduced, and we had some issues with the public notice at the last council meeting, so we couldn't approve it then. However, it is properly noticed and will be on our Monday agenda. So we will have that ready to go, and we'll talk about some potential modifications to that plan to firm it up for Monday's meeting. And before we go any further, then I'll let our consultants talk about what they have to present for us today.
Okay, so essentially what we have today is a presentation that is going to overview the broad criteria of eligibility for the uses of the American Rescue Plan Act. This is a presentation that we've given to a whole bunch of folks all across the country, and I'm going to say the word bucket about 1 million times over the course of the presentation, so I'll apologize right now for how many times you hear that word, but I'm just going to walk through all of the different buckets that you can put your money into under the interim final rule and the sub-regulatory guidance that the Treasury has put out. And I want to do this sort of as a helpful guide as you're making decisions about what priorities to pursue, just to kind of flesh out all of the options that are within the scope of the Act and the regulatory guidance that has followed under it. So our sort of like first set of big buckets, and these are things that we have talked about previously, and items that you'll notice are subcategories of the plan that that the council is going to consider at their next meeting. Those 4 buckets are responding to the public health and economic impacts of the COVID-19 public health emergency, premium pay for essential workers, replacing lost public sector revenue, and investments in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. And each of these sort of importantly have particular caveats and cabining to each of them. So for public health and economic impact, the sort of most important factor in limiting the size of that bucket is it has to be responding to the COVID-19 health pandemic. So anytime that we are operating in that bucket, the documentation is going to have to show how is the money that we're spending in this bucket responding to the pandemic in some way, or responding to negative economic impacts.
And this is readily available, Scott, for anybody that wants it. So you have a copy if you want to, whatever for your review after the fact. Just
That'd be great.
we'll send it to you. Make it readily. I saw you taking a picture down there. That's why. I wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
No, and just so everyone knows,
Sorry.
I did distribute a copy of your PowerPoint to our committee members
Oh,
prior to,
perfect.
just so
Yes.
they were aware, but I think this is going to be very beneficial to the public.
Perfect.
So in that premium pay for essential workers category, there's sort of two important asterisks, and those are that they have to have been essential workers, and for this purpose, essential is defined as sort of directly interacting with the public over the course of the pandemic. So people, so like work from home, any staff that that were working from home are not considered essential workers for this purpose. So it has to be sort of public facing, and then there's periods of eligibility in terms of how long you can go back for providing premium pay. And then in replacing lost public sector revenue, there is a detailed formula for calculating year-over-year lost revenue. And I'm actually not going to discuss that bucket anymore over the course of the presentation because Westfield did not experience under that formula any lost revenue. And then the last bucket is investments in infrastructure. And you'll notice that it's, we've spent the last year with the infrastructure bill going through Congress talking about what is infrastructure. And infrastructure has been defined as a lot of things, but here it's a very small pool of things. It's just water, sewer, and broadband. And very specifically, for water and sewer, Congress has borrowed the eligibility criteria from a couple of revolving fund programs that the EPA operates, and we'll discuss those later. And broadband is very specifically defined in terms of the quality of upload and download speed.
And just for the, sorry, Dustin, to jump in here, just for the committee's own knowledge and those members of the public who continue to follow this at the federal level. As we all start to unpack the federal legislation that was signed into law very recently by the president, we see that Indiana is set to receive about $8.8 billion through this infrastructure package. 6.6, again, these are rough numbers, but 6.6 billion going to roads and bridges. And then you kind of piece out the rest of it, and water infrastructure being a significant part that will run through some of the same programs that Dustin is talking about here through the state revolving fund at the IFA. And then broadband, of course, will go to Okra as broadband sits today. But all in all, you're looking about, $8.8 billion coming out of that new federal infrastructure bill.
Is that going to be given to the local level, or is it all going to be handled at the state level?
It's a great question. So what we have, what we've been sort of looking into is there is going to be programs set up where that fund is, you have conduits, so you have NDOT or the IFA or whoever's going to administer Okra for broadband. You're going to have those agencies be the conduit from the federal government to the state, and then they're going to have the program that's going to be responsible for getting the money out to the local units of government. It is going to be it's going to be very impactful at the local level. I think that again, with where everything sits financially for the state, I mean, this could be a very significant piece of money that comes out to local units of government related to water, broadband, and then roads. The other component that's not in ARPA is roads and bridges and infrastructure. So it could be, again, a community crossing style light grant program. I'm not sure if the match is required under this new federal program, but it could be a significant monetary deal.
Do we have to buy it, that money, to get it like a grant?
It's a great question. We're not 100% sure yet. So the bill became law about 24 hours ago, 48.
It feels
40,
like it.
Yeah, 48 hours ago. So the NDOT will be in charge of kind of administering a big chunk of that. The Community Crossings Grant Program today is kind of what we envision as a model for this, or something like for those of you who remember the previous stimulus package under, I think it was the Obama administration. Do you guys remember Tiger grants? Mm-hmm. You remember Tiger, right? So maybe call this Baby Tiger. Right, maybe like a Baby Tiger style grant program where local units wouldn't have to put up it would be more of an 80-20 match rather than a bigger match or something like that, like a smaller match piece for a grant program. But that's $6.6 billion is a lot of money for roads and bridges, and so there's going to be a component there that the locals are going to be able to tap into. So anyway, I just wanted to add that.
So now I'm just going to go through each of the big buckets in a little bit more detail and sort of flesh out sort of sub-buckets, if you will, and some of the caveats that I've mentioned. So public health and economic impacts, right? Big bucket has two sub-buckets. Those sub-buckets are responding to the public health impacts and responding to the economic impacts. So starting with the public health response, there are I would call there's almost sort of four subcategories here, right? So public safety staff is going to be a category of eligible funding to respond to the public health emergency. So insofar as you need to staff up a community vaccination effort or a community testing effort, or you have public safety staffing that is has been overwhelmed by responding to the pandemic, staffing is going to be a piece of it. The second piece is going to be materials. So PPE, all of your virus mitigating barriers and those kind of things, gowns, masks, all of that is going to be in there. And then sort of the last important sub-bucket is going to be virus proofing of physical infrastructure. So I think this is kind of a helpful illustration on the I would call the left column are like sort of very explicitly medical pieces, which is going to be like your PPE and your staffing piece, and then on the right is a column of sort of illustrative pieces about capital investments, and this has sort of been very popular with a lot of communities that we have worked with. So if insofar as you have congregate living or spaces where you're gathering people together, for counties it's usually like the jail. But senior living facilities that are operated by the city or the city hall, insofar as like you have a place where people are gathering and that space is not set up to allow people to be appropriately socially distanced, or it does not have adequate ventilation, you can use funds to make updates and improvements to existing capital facilities. Existing capital improvements to existing facilities to mitigate the virus. And then there's also there's this additional piece, and this is really, I think, quite innovative. You can use the funds for expanding health services that sort of are either not currently offered or that aren't offered in a way that meet the need, specifically for mental health, substance abuse, and behavioral health services. We all spend a lot of time indoors, so there's been sort of broad impact on folks and their ability to kind of cope with the challenges of life. And insofar as that's an issue in the community, that is something that you can use the funds on to respond to the public health. I guess what I mean is the mental health crisis is a part of the public health crisis from the IFR's perspective. So then turning to addressing the negative economic impacts, this sub-bucket, and it has 4 sub-buckets. The first sub-bucket there is going to be helping individuals. So job training programs, programs to address food insecurity, survivor's benefits for persons who are related to a victim of COVID-19, benefits to provide for funeral services for persons who have died of COVID-19, assistance to folks who are facing eviction and need legal services, and rent and utilities are all going to be within that broad category. Also in there can be things like if folks need a ride to work, if that's like what's keeping them from being able to get back to work, and the city wants to provide that service, or to subsidize childcare. Secondly is going to be supporting small businesses. So this is something that has been mentioned, I think, as an area of interest for Westfield, because incorporated in this category is assistance to nonprofit organizations. So
Let me jump in real quick right there. I will tell you, we've been working on a grant document that could be used if you wanted to use a grant application document. We've been putting our kind of drafts together on what that would look like, to make sure that we're asking the appropriate questions to give you all the chance to review. And remember, as we've always said, right, it's not just that the initial grant has to be in accordance with the IFR. It's the money that then in turn that entity spends those dollars on has to be in accordance or eligible under the IFR. So
And it has to be after March 3rd, 2021, correct?
yeah, if you're transferring it down to a nonprofit organization, then yes.
Now, what about business assistance? I mean, does that have to be also in terms of benefit loss or something after that date?
If it's a grant that's responding to economic hardship, so there's and this is I have a slide on this, but there's a difference between a transfer and a grant. Transfers are going to be tightly bound by the same criteria, the same restrictions on Westfield are going to be the restrictions on whoever is a recipient of a transfer. They're a sub-recipient of the money. And so if you made a transfer to a nonprofit, any expense they use the money for has to have occurred after March 3rd, 2021. And then if you conversely gave a grant to a small business or gave a grant to a nonprofit who had suffered economic hardship, and the grant was meant to alleviate their economic hardship rather than to sort of pay them to provide services, then they're allowed to spend their money on things that occurred prior to March 3rd, 2021. So it's really, what matters is the character of the organization that's receiving it and the reason that they're receiving the money. Because that will guide when we've transferred money and when we've granted money. So when you're responding to a business that has suffered significant revenue loss and needs help making their ends meet on their rent, or like making payroll, or needs help to build out their space in a virus sort of compliant way, those are going to be grants. And so if the rent is in arrears prior to March 3rd, 2021, they can use that grant money for that purpose.
If they haven't already been reimbursed through another program. for
That's
that.
correct.
Yes,
That-
good
yeah,
point,
Yeah,
Cindy.
yes,
That's a
that is,
great
that
point.
is correct.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the last one, rebuilding the public sector capacity. Dusty, you want to touch on that a little bit about?
Yeah, so you are permitted to hire back to your pre-pandemic staffing levels. So wherever your staffing was on January 3rd of 2020, insofar as you have lost staff as a result of the pandemic, you can go back to that. And you also are allowed to use funds to essentially up your ability to provide public services. So if your implementation of relief services is being hindered by a lack of data analytics or a lack of community outreach, you can spend money to enhance your other programs' ability to do their jobs.
The only thing we would always remind you is that it's not in perpetuity, right? The encumbered by 24, out of the bank by 26. So we're always very conscious of Westfield or any other local unit of government signing a contract that goes beyond the period of funding. Then the city would then assume the cost of the contract beyond the date of where the money can be spent. Just something to keep in mind as we roll through this.
That window of eligibility is perhaps the clearest piece of the IFR.
Yeah, it's the only
Very-
thing they got right.
Yeah, that one is crystal
The
clear.
dates.
The rest of it is
Yeah.
murky, but
Yeah.
the dates are clear. So this was exactly what I sort of just walked through, explaining the difference between a transfer to a nonprofit versus a grant or loan to mitigate negative public health or economic impacts. And sort of on a case-by-case basis, as you evaluate who you're going to give funds to, you can make decisions about who's going to be a transferee and who's going to be a grantee. And that really is sort of based on their need and also based on what you want them to do with the money, right? If it's to address a shortfall in their revenues, that's a grant. If you're paying them to provide services essentially on behalf of the city, then that's a transfer. And so as we go along, I think that'll be a sort of a case-by-case basis, probably the best approach for the committee to make decisions about how you're going to do your regulatory due diligence and compliance, really more than setting up a transfer program versus a granting program kind of thing. But just wanted to make that all clear because it's a little sticky, right?
That's
So
right. Transfer versus grant, yeah, loan, yep.
We have, sorry.
No, go ahead.
So I'm more like accounting purpose. Do we need to set up the transfer versus grants, like a separate designated for separately, make it sure that's a better way to track?
I think yeah, it would probably be appropriate to call them different things.
If the
Um,
committee determines that's the path to
So that way we
spend the
have a
money
right
on.
record of what.
That's right,
Right.
that's right. If the committee said we wanted to do $250,000 in grants and $250,000 in transfers, yes. We would put those into separate funds, have separate debits out of those accounts, you could track those down. We do recommend a finite amount of money, kind of a very transparent, first in, first out kind of grant process based on if they meet the criteria, those kind of things. I mean, we'd want to put some real thought into how you're going to evaluate those kind of things. So transparency and on evaluating criteria and those kind of things would be paramount. But
Yeah.
the grant application helps with that, right? Because you get to ask some very specific questions, right? About
When you
what the-
compare, though, the grants and transfers, the transfer seems like it's much more restrictive and more time-consuming for us to manage that. Why would we do that versus just a general grant program?
Well, because so grants to nonprofits really are going to be for addressing negative public health or economic impacts, right? So for a nonprofit organization that's providing critical services to underserved persons in your community, but who is doing okay, a transfer is gonna be the way that you would give them money, right? Because essentially what
Okay.
you're doing is augmenting their ability to provide their services as opposed to helping them keep the lights on.
Okay, so the grant program, you have to show a loss, whereas the transfer program, you can be in a good position financially and not experiencing kind of a loss during COVID, but you want to expand your services or provide additional capabilities.
Right, yeah. Essentially, it's a different ask. You know,
Got it.
one is you're asking the nonprofit, like your Westfield could provide this service, right? But it makes more sense to transfer our money to a nonprofit that's already in that space to do that, right? And that would be why you would transfer money rather than,
For example, we gave us some money, not this money, but it's only COVID money to the library. That is a transfer, because the library, lost some, they were paying for everything, but there was not grant, so we just gave the money to their portion. They lost. The transfer, they categorize the transfer then?
well, I mean, insofar as you were, well, and libraries are sort of unique because they're subunits of government.
Yeah.
So
So how
they're,
does it work?
they're a little different. Anytime you're giving a subunit of government money, it's gonna be a transfer,
Okay,
not
that's
a
what I-
grant. Because you
Okay.
can't give grants to subunits of government. But, you know, so if you had a nonprofit library, right, and you had two libraries, right? Let's say you have two libraries, they're both nonprofit organizations.
Right.
And Library A, you know, lost a bunch of members due to the virus and is struggling to keep the lights on, but is a valuable community resource. You could give them a grant, right, to help them pay for the building. And Library B is doing fine, right, but wants to expand, you know, a food bank service that they also offer as an ancillary service, right? Or wants to expand and offer services to persons in the community who are facing eviction and like offer legal clinical space in the library. You could transfer money to Library B to expand the services, right? We're not responding to a negative economic impact on Library B. We're using Library B as a vehicle to achieve an ARPA compliant purpose. Was that a helpful? Sometimes I'm not sure. I get like real deep on an example and I'm like, I don't know if that was like a good
Yeah.
example or not.
No, I think it
Okay.
works, though. I think that's yeah.
But yeah, and as we go along, right, and depending on what objectives you want, like, you know, the committee wants to achieve, right, you can make decisions about what the right organizations are gonna be to give the money and the right vehicle to do that. And ultimately, it'll be about how we, what compliance steps we take, as the money is being distributed to organizations.
And some grants are inherently enumerated as eligible. Like if you were giving a grant to an entity that focused on mental health, like that's specifically enumerated, you know, as a combating the public health emergency or something like that. So
Right.
there are other things where it doesn't get as technical, right? But if you were
Mhm.
giving it to a nonprofit that wasn't otherwise enumerated because of lost membership, revenue, whatever it is, then yeah, there's a little bit of an analysis there.
But that's
Yeah.
that's analysis we can do
Totally.
as we go along.
Premium pay.
So our next big bucket, so premium pay, right, like I said, is sort of hinges on first the definition of essential work. So it has to be work involving regular in-person interactions or regular physical handling of items that have also been handled by others. So that is our universe of people who are essential workers. And then secondly, our essential workers have to have been needed to maintain continuity of operations for essential critical infrastructure sectors and other critical sectors. So here the mayor essentially has to make a determination about who is and is not critical, and the universe can be sort of larger than you might think in terms of who's critical. Actually, I can't remember if we have a. Yeah, okay, so you know, like staff at private nursing homes and hospitals and home cares settings could be considered essential, right? Logistics personnel, janitors and sanitation workers, even who are not employees of the city, right? So essential workers can be both employees of private employers and also employees of the city. But public safety employees of the city, which is I think maybe what is a little closer to the ideas that the committee might have, are totally gonna be in there. but just to give you a sense of the universe is maybe a little larger than you might immediately think. And then the second sort of important caveat on premium pay is going to be these sort of numerical limits. So you can offer up to $13 an hour in premium wages above and beyond whatever an employee was owed. And it does have to be above and beyond. Premium pay is not replacement pay. It is like you're offering a bonus.
Bonus, yeah.
And it can only be up to $25,000 for any single worker. Premium pay can be retroactive to the beginning of the pandemic. January 27th of 2020 is going to be the date that you can go back to. And the Biden administration and the Treasury in their guidance have been clear that prioritizing workers who are low and moderate income should be the objective of your program. And the way that they're sort of enforcing that is that you have to provide specific additional justification if premium pay would cause the workers who are receiving it to be making above 150% of the state's average annual wage.
And that's a Department of Labor calculation, so we pulled down the Department of Labor statistic, and you have a review on what 150% of the state's average would be, and you compare it then to the salary of each one of your employees that you think would qualify for premium pay.
And you can just do a lump sum
Totally.
$1,000 bonus per.
100%.
Now, what about from a documentation standpoint? If we make a designation of, say, frontline public safety
Yep.
personnel, do we have to have a by name roster or some kind of a verification process that says, yes, they are frontline?
Yeah.
Or is that really up to us?
So the sort of criteria is that if an employee's unit was doing essential work, then they're considered to have been doing essential work, right? So, the police force is an operational unit, and the police force is doing essential work. So the whole police force, everyone in the police force, who is
Administrator at the office.
technically, yes, as long as they're.
But we
as
don't
long-
have to do that.
You don't have to do
Okay.
that, right? Yeah, but technically, yeah, as long as the unit is engaged in essential work, then everybody is engaged in essential work, as long as they were working in person, right, in a public-facing role.
Okay.
So your police officers certainly were. They did
Yeah.
not take off, for a year,
They
right?
weren't working remote.
You can't do that from home. I lost my train of thought.
No, that's okay, yeah.
But,
It gets sticky if you have people who you deem essential, I mean, like, that were working from home. It doesn't
Yeah.
work, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
there's just, it's spelled out, there's a calculation, gotta be what, public and public facing?
Yeah.
Handling public business and public facing, right?
Mhm.
We would just wanna make sure that anybody on that, your police officers, obviously,
Yeah.
right?
yeah,
But,
yeah, public safety personnel generally are probably
Yeah.
all gonna be totally okay. And then our last bucket is gonna be investments in infrastructure. And I already talked about, that is limited to water, sewer, and broadband. Specifically,
and candidly, I'm sorry, Dustin, to keep interrupting you, but, and candidly, if the city is looking at broadband, there are other programs through another state agency that I would encourage us to look at first. Use your ARPA dollars on water and sewer, and we could pursue broadband dollars through OCRA, the Office of Community and Rural Affairs, through the LG's office first, before putting dollars directly to broadband.
And we only have a stormwater utility.
Okay, so there you go. So it's even more limited than in that place. But there's just so much broadband money. I mean, we put $250 million into the budget last year for broadband, right? So there's just a lot of broadband money out there.
Right.
I'd rather have the city use that first and save your money for projects direct,
That don't have other funding.
That's right. They don't have other funding sources.
So water and sewer infrastructure, they're guided by the Environmental Protection Agency's Clean Water State Revolving Fund Program and Drinking Water State Revolving Fund Program, which I'm going to use the acronym CWSRF and DWSRF. And they sound way too similar for ease of use, and I apologize for that. CWSRF deals specifically with like pollution and water quality is sort of its drive, and it has 11 eligibility criteria. So any project that you decide you want to do, the question, we'll hold that up against the chart of 11 things that you can do under the CWSRF and ask, can we fit it in any of these buckets? That's a lot of buckets. DWSRF deals with drinking water treatment and transmission and sources, and it has 6 eligibility criteria, or 6 categories of eligibility. And so this is kind of the most technical area of the interim final rule in terms of like the, water treatment plants have to have particular characteristics to fit into category 6 of the DWSRF, and it feels very sciencey. But I've spent a lot of time,
A lot of time
in the
a lot of time
eligibility
in those 2
criteria.
programs.
I know more about water treatment plants than I ever thought I would,
That's
being not an environmental lawyer by trade. But
And fire hydrants, and extending
oh,
lines, and,
yes.
yeah.
There are very particular rules about fire hydrants, so
Totally.
if you want to do fire hydrants, we're going to have a whole conversation about it.
Yeah.
But those two programs are going to be the sort of guiding principles. And so flood control, stormwater runoff, if you have water pollution or penetration of your water system, agricultural runoff, and then also green infrastructure. So if you wanted to do a green streets initiative, or if you wanted to do rain gardens to,
We didn't know what that was at the time.
we did also have to look that
We had
one
to
up.
look
Yeah.
rain gardens up.
Yes. And that, interesting, we didn't until somebody asked if they
Yeah.
could do a rain garden.
Right.
And it turns out you like explicitly can.
You can,
That's
yeah.
Well, our Public Works Department, they're pretty good with this stuff. And I'm
Well,
an environmental planner too, just
I'm gonna
if
say
that
so. There you
helps.
go.
So we could have some options.
Yeah.
I say Cindy knows what a rain
Sure.
garden is.
And we've had more questions, I gotta tell you too, on flood control than we've ever had.
Ton of fun.
Okay.
Yeah.
A ton of flood control, just that communities have experienced, for whatever reason, more of general flooding issues or wanting to lower flood insurance costs if you live in a quasi-plain or anything like that, and they've wanted to mitigate some of that with dollars they've never had before. So that was another one that we just didn't have a ton of, we had to read about the flood control statute.
Yeah, and CWSRF and DWSRF do allow, to a certain extent, planning expenditures.
Oh, yeah.
The objective is that
Yeah.
the planning results in a capital project, right? But if you're like, if what you need is a floodplain study,
Yep.
or a or a
Stormwater
a
runoff.
stormwater
or-
runoff, yeah. Even if
What
you-
about a rate study to see if your current rates are?
I would doubt that. I don't think. I think
Yeah. I
didn't
that's
think
probably
so.
not. That's probably not in there. We have to look. That's the. You asked a new question.
Oh, yeah.
And then these are just more examples, and to give you, just building out the sense of those eligibility criteria. I should move through my slides quicker. So the last sort of piece that I wanted to highlight, the Senate passed unanimously 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago.
Senate Bill 3011, which the focus of that bill is opening up ARPA eligibility much more broadly, to allow communities to use these ARPA funds for a broader range of things. Sort of most pressingly, or most excitingly, if you will, I think for Westfield, is that first bullet point. The bill would allow the first $10 million that any unit receiving ARPA funds received to count as though they were lost revenue, which can be used for any government services, which essentially would allow you to reimburse yourself for up to $10 million, or well, up to the whole amount of your ARPA allocation for general government services. And then once you've taken care of, general government services, you have that much money to do other things with.
And as you know, the government services language in the IFR is, for all intents and purposes, any legal
Whatever you
thing
want
that the city
Blank
wants to-
check for us, basically.
Totally.
Yeah.
So if we have a balanced budget already, we could use it for the Y.
There you go.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's why,
Wow.
we had a scheduled meeting, that's why we had asked for a few weeks just to see on
Yeah.
the traction side. So Dustin and I participated so we're belonging to some trade organizations in National League of Cities and National Association of Counties, at NACO and, let's see, actually, NLC. And we were on the call today, and we're pushing every member of the House we can get a hold of to try to pass this piece of legislation. They could do it before the end of the year. It's not, again, I'm not trying to make a partisan statement one way or another. It's not a partisan piece of legislation. It's just a flexibility act. And there were Republicans and Republicans and Democrats in the Senate who were all supportive of this piece.
But that hasn't been passed yet.
It has not been passed by the House. And so that is what the one sticking point on, and we'll get into the memo and, the discussion that we've had on this, but that's the one sticking point on new construction, that zero of our trade associations or large-scale national groups will sign off on new construction. It's just not there in the IFR, and the Treasury won't put out any new, they put out a new FAQ today, didn't touch it. So everybody's waiting until either this goes through or they get some final guidance before they allow specifically new construction. Actually, like, have land, build new building, or new facilities.
Yeah.
Something like that.
But the 3011 money would change the game.
Would change the game.
Would change the game for that. And then the other two pieces of the bill that the bill is extensive, but the two pieces that were sort of most pressing are that it up to 30% or $10 million of your allocation could be used for surface transportation projects. Though, to note, we're about to go through a surface transportation bonanza.
Yeah.
And
I
then
don't see that being
also anything that would be CDBG grant or block grant eligible would be in that piece. And we're about to go through a community development bonanza.
And then they threw, like, the South and the West a bone there with number 3 about using it for natural disaster response. So fires out west, anything in the South out of hurricane season, things like that. They could use ARPA dollars for otherwise declared natural disasters.
That's a game changer.
Oh,
Let's
yeah.
hope that.
Let's hope it moves. I mean, we've contacted everybody in the state of Indiana, every congressional member in the state of Indiana, and continue to push. So it's again, it doesn't have any baggage that we can see that would be like, oh, this is for this group or that group or anything like that. It's just, hey, you all have this money. Like, we're just opening it up now more broadly to do this. But, yeah. So, it's important.
So this is just to sort of re-underline the dates. All funds have to be incurred by December 31st, 2024, which essentially means you have to have obligated them to a purpose, and they have to be expended. They have to be out of the account by December 31st, 2026. Even a penny that's in the account on December 31st, 2026 goes back to the Treasury. And then, importantly, there are ongoing reporting obligations, and there will be compliance obligations as we go along. And those are, we're here for you. We're going to be alongside you in doing those. For non-entitlement units, it has been moved back to April 31st of 2022 is when your first report is.
Spend it means you have cut the checks. I mean, it's not clear.
It's
when
not
you
yet.
cut the check,
The money
when
is out.
The monies are out.
Yeah, the money is
Long as it's
spent.
money, cut the check.
Yeah, the money has been, has to be spent.
So they don't cash that.
So from your guys, I'm sorry, are we through this, or, because I have one
I think,
question, I guess?
Yep.
yeah, we're through.
Okay, so
There you go.
Perfect timing.
I know Cindy and I have had many conversations about this. We know we're behind in Westfield compared to maybe other cities in terms of their strategy and spending of dollars. But that change is worth waiting for. At what point do you think, okay, typical DC, it's gonna get buried, they're using it as leverage, it's not gonna happen? When do we move on and just start to execute a more substantial, we got a few things we want to accomplish today,
sure.
but big picture, when do we abandon that and move on?
So, it's a challenging question, Scott, but it's the right question. I mean, we're heading into an election year. As 22 is, there's a significant number of seats in Congress that are up, as everybody calls them, the midterms. And there's, this is a purely political observation, but one party's polling right now is not great versus the other party, and that's typically and historically the way it always operates. The one party that doesn't have the White House polls worse and performs worse at the midterms. You saw it in whatever, 96, whatever, 94 and 96 and everything like that. So I would say you'd know by the first quarter of 22 whether or not they're going to pass this. They need to move pretty quick. I mean, they're at the end of the deadline here. I mean, I think Congress leaves the 16th, the 17th, or something like that in December. We can get you a little bit more of a firmer answer on some of that on a date of like, hey, this is a drop dead. But I mean, a bipartisan piece of legislation 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I may have said nothing was going to pass, but maybe there's some movement there on something like that the House could get something done there.
Okay.
But we'll try to get you a firmer date. I would say you'd have pretty good idea in the first quarter of 22 whether or not it's going to happen or not.
Okay.
Eventually, it gets scrapped and the Senate would have to repass it, and that's DOA at
Yeah.
that point. Yeah. So.
And I think there's things we want to do outside of that, but for us, a big chunk of the money that
Yeah.
we were looking at spending, I'd almost feel like we should hold it back until we know for sure, because they'd have a lot more, some of the projects we're looking at from an infrastructure standpoint are, yeah, it'd be nice to do that 10 years from now or 5 years from now, but it's not an immediate impact that we were hoping to get from the use of these funds. Whereas there are other projects out there that I know we've all been thinking about that could have immediate impacts
Yeah.
if we could use it for that. Right now, we can't.
Yeah, and, we're operating, as Dustin and I said the very first time we met, is that we're operating under a very weird time, right?
Yeah.
Where the federal government is pumping dollars into the states and the local level. What happens in 26 or, whenever the bank accounts have to be empty by then, I mean, it could be a very different time period. So, as long as we keep maintaining an idea that encumbered by 24 and out of the bank account by 26, as long as there's comfortability with the projects, then the timeline works.
But there's real challenges around that, and Cindy and I were talking about that yesterday. With this infrastructure bill, you're not gonna be able to get people to do the work.
No
There's gonna
way.
be such a demand for these
That's right.
engineering firms and construction firms that,
Just already with the local projects
Yeah,
that
for sure.
you think that people are considering, we all have similar pots of money, if you will, and, a
That's
lot of
right.
additional projects, all in a very tight time frame. I mean,
Yeah.
when you think about public works projects, usually you schedule them years out.
That's right.
And so then we start coming up against that time period and how that's all gonna play in when you think about our region and everybody looking for those same workers and
Same workers,
firms.
same raw materials, parts.
Material.
I mean,
Well, that's the thing, and so, I mean, I do get concerned just overall on how this is all gonna play out in terms of the infrastructure parts
Yep.
of it working.
and when you let projects, I mean, if you increase community crossings, that means it's not just Westfield, it's Fishers, Carmel, Noblesville, Sheridan, Hamilton County. I mean, then the counties you all touch, I mean, there's, Zionsville, Lebanon, Western, Boone
Kokomo,
County, right?
Tipton, Frankfurt.
Yeah, totally, right? So you go around the place there, and it's not just in a regional competition, it's legitimate.
And just from materials.
Oh my
too, I mean,
gosh.
that's-
Bigger cities, a bigger project, they got more money, so of course they're gonna be
Yeah.
bigger money to spend, everybody gonna jump in over there.
Yeah, the city, I do know the city of Indianapolis, I think, has about $280 million. And they have they're just put out like a RFQ, I think it was, maybe it was a bit of an RFQ, I think, for an audit firm to help track where those dollars go, right? Because imagine what their report's gonna be like, so they're in the process of just getting their own kind of small I infrastructure set up to then go about how they wanna, spend, but then everybody's in a different place, right? We've dealt with some communities in southern Indiana that, looked at us and said, we wanna put all of our money into sewer and flood control. Here you go, here's what we wanna do, and then they're trying to move forward. We've had other communities that have said, we're really gonna take a step back, kind of see what 2022 lines up and really kind of work through, is premium pay appropriate, is, some of these projects. So there are kind of all over if you did a plot, of where all the groups are, candidly, I'm very concerned that if the legislature cuts the business personal property tax, we're gonna have a pretty significant hole in our budget. So, there's questions about local legislative action too that raise some questions. So, right now, I think our biggest question mark is 3011, and we'll try to go back and get you a little bit firmer date on the drop dead date on what that would look like. We were there on the call with our federal team this morning, talking through that issue. But as far as other projects, is there anything we could answer that you're thinking about right now, or?
Well, at the last meeting, I did say I was gonna try to at least come up with an idea of percentages generally on these buckets, right?
Yeah.
Just to give context to our situation, to see how people felt about it. And so very generally, after looking at numerous things, and because there's basically the 4 buckets, and the way I did this was I came up with about 45% of it responding to the pandemic, the negative economic impacts. So that would include the nonprofits and/or looking at business assistance and stuff like that. About 40% for infrastructure. And 10% into that audit and consulting services. And I know that SBOA said 10% for audit. I kind of put your guys' fees in that too, just because I thought that's probably gonna wind up being.
Professional services, compliance, whatever you want to call it.
Correct. And then approximately 5% for the premium pay.
Yeah.
And so right now, and Scott Willis did some great work for us here, and he got us the list of the firefighters, police officers,
Good.
and where we're at with that.
Great.
And so when we looked at it, we have 131 people that would qualify there in our public safety. And so in terms of our overall disbursement, 5% would still allow even a little bit beyond the number here to provide each of those people $1,500 one time.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
And so we were hoping today, at least just Scott and I, and we wanted to bring it to the committee to see if there was will, at least at this point, and we can have the further discussions about the broader use, but because it seems like there is going to be a desire to do the premium pay, if we could vote to do that today, if it was appropriate,
For sure.
to send that to council for their consideration and to include in our ARPA plan.
For sure.
So I've got a comment and a question. So my comment would be, for those in the audience, Linda, we're defining frontline as literally frontline. We're not talking staff, support staff. We really want to just focus on those that were interacting with the public and exposing themselves to dangers that nobody else had to do. So it's not all encompassing for the police department or the fire department, but it's those that we feel put themselves out there a bit more than others. My question would be, when it goes to council, what'd be really impactful is to be able to get these guys and gals a $1,500 bonus before the end of the year, because we have this thing called the holidays coming up, which can be an expensive time of year. But what process does it have to go through at the council? Is it like a resolution, or is it like an ordinance that has to be presented and then you wait 30 days to vote on it? How does that work?
So the way that we are at council on the 22nd, the plan is to appropriate the ARPA funds to the plan, and included in the plan will be this premium pay component with the sort of proper citations to the federal regulatory authority that undergirds that you can use the money for that purpose. And then the money will be appropriated, and so just your normal claims process should be
Nice,
the way
so it'd be
that.
pretty quick.
Yeah, you should be able,
Nice,
yeah.
that's great. I mean, the government can do something
That's
in a
right.
timely manner.
Only in
Wow.
Westfield, Indiana.
Scott, the only thing I would tell you is for our own, our own plan on the compliance side, names.
We'll get a by
total
name roster.
salary, that kind of thing, just because there is that Department of Labor calculation, not that any of these guys would ever come anywhere close to what
Yeah,
it would be.
but just
for our own.
dotting i's and
That's
crossing
right,
t's. Yep.
let's just make sure that we got all that in a file somewhere.
Right, I would also record, like data, hire or write that they worked through the.
Oh, yeah,
Through the
something- yeah.
pandemic.
So tell me what we need. We need to know
We'll put
by
it in an
name
email.
roster.
We'll put it in
Okay,
an email.
perfect, then I
Yep.
can just forward it on
Boom,
to the
forward it on,
chiefs.
then they
That'd
can
be
just
great.
create you a report.
Perfect.
Yep. Yeah, we just want proof that they were, they weren't hired like 4 days ago. Yeah,
Perfect.
yeah.
So
do we
Cindy,
need
should
to
I go ahead and
make
make a motion then?
Yeah,
or-
I would like that.
So I'll make a motion to approve $196,500 in support of a premium bonus for frontline safety personnel to include 66 firefighters and 65 police officers.
I'll second that. Just for formality here, let's call for the vote. Scott Willis?
Yes?
Misha?
Yeah.
You are on the committee, Misha. John Rogers? John Rogers?
Doesn't look like he's on the call anymore.
Okay. Well, we still have a quorum with us three, so that's
yeah.
fine to make a vote. Okay, and I will vote yes.
1, 2, 3.
How many?
5. Come on.
We got a quorum.
We got a quorum.
Okay.
Okay. So the motion passed to send that onto council, included in the plan that we will be considering for Monday. All right, so there is an exact total that he included in that motion, so we will include that exact total in the plan. I had suggested in just looking at premium pay, the 5%. And again, I brought up these percentages for discussion with our committee. I realize we only have the three of us here, but one of the things that I thought was important to do, in my opinion at this point, I want to know where we are at with the community. Right now, I've been getting more and more questions now with the general public saying, hey, what's up with that? And they just don't know what our plan is, and we're trying to figure that out, obviously. And we don't do this alone, and so we need this public input. And we don't have a strategy set out for that yet. And now, given the fact that we have at least come up with a draft, I have, and that's what I was hoping to get any kind of feedback from you all about that 45, 40, 10, 5 that I've done, if it's appropriate to bring that to the public. So first of all, do you all agree with that kind of philosophy moving forward as something to bring to the public and to include generally in our plan right now moving forward for guidance, that's how we would be then looking at moving forward, realizing that could change all the time as we find appropriate, but again, to bring something to the public for discussion. So, the two of you here, do you have any thoughts about those numbers?
I just did some quick math on my calculator. So if we do 40, I'm sure I understand this, 40% for non-for-profits, is that correct?
45.
45? So that's going to be over $4 million. And I don't know, with us only having like 12 or so non-for-profits.
Well, actually, and there was a discussion point. So I was doing that in terms of thinking that the Y would be somehow included
Okay,
in that.
okay,
And we
that
don't know,
changes it,
again,
okay.
because of the situation with that. I just did not want to actually put it somewhere else and then not have it available right now if it was possible. So I don't know that that's appropriate.
And you could totally do 45% of what's available after assuming, like, setting aside the Y money, right? Because you're not under any pressure to spend it immediately. So, you can pretend that, the tranche 1 was just the money after we did the Y project. And then
Well, and
40
this is only for the amount we have now. This was not in total. So in the
Oh,
appropriation in
okay.
our
I
plan,
didn't
right
understand
now,
that
we're
correctly.
only dealing with half of it.
Okay, that makes sense.
So again, that leaves our next disbursement available.
Yeah, so I don't disagree with those calculations, but maybe because the game could be potentially changing dramatically, maybe we look at it from, we just take the Y completely out of the equation right now. And we just look at non-for-profits and what do we want to donate or commit to dollars for those organizations, because I think the further we get away from COVID, the less impactful that money really is. And we really want to get it to them sooner rather than later. And I'd hate to be paralyzed by the elephant in the middle of the room with the Y. So I would rather us revisit that number and come up with a number that is just purely for the 12 local, is it 12, am I saying that correctly?
Well, so here's the thing, and I did provide our committee, and I don't know
This
if
is
you
a great
guys
list,
have
by
this.
the way, Cindy.
Misha, would you throw them down the, and again, this was something, and I have to preface this, I asked our township trustee for help here because she obviously deals with poor relief and a lot of other, basically every nonprofit that's around. And I said, can you tell me the people, the organizations that are service, if you will, in Westfield that are probably part of it? She provided me this list. And so this is not all-inclusive, obviously. This is the list of, these are people providing services, if you will, from what I understand, that could have been, impacted by the pandemic. And I have spoken with a few. And again, because of, if you're doing the transfer, the grant or whatever, it was hard to say where people are really going to be in this. So we're going to have to do more investigation with these groups to find out what their actual needs are. But I also wanted to know from the group if we did want to expand it to the non-service organizations, nonprofits. And when we do that, there's obviously probably exponentially more of them when you factor that in. So I was hoping to get feedback.
I would be open to that, to expanding it. I know that's a broad statement, and there's a lot of things that fall under that, but I would like to see a priority to these charities because they directly impact our citizens. And when you look at the charities, they hit a wide variety of services that could have huge impacts. But when I look at your list below of other opportunities, there's some good things there.
And again, I wouldn't want to limit it to just this. This was a good starting point of some of the major players here that have been doing the most or probably have the bigger needs. So, so you're saying that we probably, you don't want to have that much in the.
If we take the Y out of the equation, I would rather not. I mean, that's $4 million. Most of these budgets for these organizations, I don't even know if we could legally do that, because isn't there a limit on how much we can give them based on their operating budget, or is there no limit to what we do? Can we just
Oh, that depends if you're transferring money to them or if you're granting.
granting it?
money.
Okay, that's right. There's two different ways.
So if you're, I don't know, if one of these organizations, right, like provides housing assistance for persons who are experiencing houselessness, right, and you wanted to dramatically expand their ability to provide services in the community, you could transfer them a
Unlimited.
lot of money.
Yeah, okay.
As long as they're using it for an ARPA eligible purpose. But if you were granting them money, it would have to be in response to a loss in revenue or a provable economic impact from the virus.
Okay. So does it make sense to reach out to these organizations and try to get a sense how many of them actually have a loss and what that looks like, and then maybe we can work it backwards from there?
Well, and one of the most tricky parts in doing this is that, again, it gets so technical, and then you're looking at these dates, and
Yeah.
and when I talk to some of these folks, it's like, some of them got reimbursed for a few things, others didn't, others, they're not doing bad. They found a way to make it up. And so some of them, it's going to be difficult to actually show a loss when they were based all on,
Well, I can tell you firsthand,
Fundraisers,
the
for
Westfield
instance,
Library
and they-
Foundation doesn't really, they're just a fundraising arm. There's very little cost, just the coordinator of the foundation, but I don't know how you show a loss for something like that, because there's no budget.
well, and again, that's the thing. So we have a lot more work to do. And again,
I
this
agree.
list was provided by our township trustees, so. And again, when I came up with that 45%, it was based on having money for the Y in there too. And
Okay.
so
That
again-
makes more sense, yeah.
And we would need to account for that somewhere, and that would be the place to do it, correct?
Under the current rules. But if the rules change,
Yeah.
then we can just do a grant to the Y and be done with it. And we don't have to track or any of the accountability that comes with it.
Because it'd be a provision of government service.
That's right.
Would you like to see this changed, these numbers?
Under the rules today, no. Under the rules tomorrow, yes. So I guess if you're asking me today what I'd like to do, I'd like to hold off as long as we can to see if they're gonna change the rules, because again, it just makes life real easy for us. But I don't want to delay these great organizations from getting some relief, so I'm kind of in a rock and a hard place here. I guess I would like to see us address this today, or start moving that ball forward, and then take the why out of the equation. And let's see what comes from Congress, and then we can regroup. Because it's not gonna, I don't think it's gonna change, and it does, if we do that, it's not gonna take the ball away from the why if we decide to go revisit that. We're just choosing to postpone any decisions or any money to them. So,
But you would prefer to get groups like this money faster, which means
Yes.
that we would have to have this in our plan
yes,
and some kind of dollar amount associated with it, and then the application process and
Yes.
that in place to be able to
You
do
could
all
cer,
that.
you could certainly put, you know, a starter amount of money, right, in the category, and then we could later, you can later amend up, right, the amount of money, that is sort of pledged to that purpose.
yeah, if this isn't set in stone, then let's move forward with your numbers, and we can amend it later if we need to. I mean, that's fine with me.
This would give us a lot of wiggle room anyway.
It would,
And it also provide Jeremy a way to look at and see if he'd like to actually pursue any of these sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
Because there might be certain timelines he's looking at and making sure that those infrastructure projects could happen, or at least pick out one or two that could be, yeah, and that way he'd know that he'd have the dollars there. And again, this is something I want to bring to the public, you know, and I'm hoping we can, if the group is okay with this, I mean, should this be then in our plan also moving forward for Monday? These percentages, is that how we should be approaching this?
Yeah, it could be, yeah.
Would that then give us the ability to move forward on any of these things? Or would it have to be further refined?
So I think you could appropriate the funds, and then that would give you the authority to move forward on these, going forward in the future. Because you've appropriated the actual money then, it's yours to then spend. You've said as the legislative body, hey, or the fiscal body, sorry, that you can, we're appropriating you up to whatever the dollar amounts are to go forward with these projects, and then you can go forward on these projects.
So based on these numbers, if we, in our plan right now, put some dollar amounts in there, even realizing they could change,
I wouldn't exceed them if you passed them on Monday.
not to exceed.
Yeah.
Well, at least not without amending the plan
Sorry.
to increase the
Yeah.
amount
Okay, good.
first, right?
Okay,
So,
yeah.
Okay.
so like, don't, yeah, so like, so say you approved a $100,000 charitable organizations grant program. Before you spend $100,000 in $1, we should increase the
back.
amount of the grant. We
We
should,
should
we
come
should
back.
have a meeting, and we should amend the plan
Yeah.
by a resolution of the town council.
Increase the dollar amount.
So there's really no risk in us doing this today, knowing that changes could be coming?
Oh, gosh, no.
Then let's,
No.
yeah, I
Yeah,
think
it's,
those
it's your
numbers are-
plan.
It's a living,
Yep,
breathing
okay.
document.
Then I think, Cindy, we move forward with the percent you came, and we'll amend it as things change, if they change.
Basically what he said, that after spend, it's hard to change it, so, exceed the money. If we want $100,000 in here, after we got $101,000 spent, and then we got a problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
You just have to keep an eye on it.
It's kind of like we're city council and appropriation of funds, right? Same thing.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's, Misha, you just have to.
I think
if
we
they-
can
if-
handle
if
that.
they- If they say, we'd like an extra dollar, you just smack them on the hand, and you say,
No.
not until you amend the plan first.
Denied,
You-
denied.
They
I'm-
still spend.
So do we need to make a formal motion to include these percentages in our plan then?
Yeah.
Yeah, yep.
I guess we should have just done that with the premium pay,
Yeah.
but
That's right.
we'll go and just
I'll
do
let
it
you,
in
you've got the
general.
percents, why don't you make the motion, Cindy, and I'll second it.
Okay, and I don't have the official plan in front of me. Can I just put it into the buckets and explain how I put it in the agenda?
Yeah, for sure.
Yes.
Okay, I will make a motion to include the following percentage amounts from the buckets. I know it's a terrible thing to,
It's okay. Buckets are a popular term these days.
That's how I
the
refer
only
to
way
it all the
is-
time.
It's the best way I know how to describe
Yeah.
it.
He's planted that word in our brains.
That's right.
Yes, so 45% for responding to the pandemic, the negative economic impact, which would include that nonprofit piece and potentially assistance to business. 40% on infrastructure, and for us, that's primarily stormwater. And the 10% for services, which would be for auditing and consulting, and the 5% for premium pay.
I'll second that motion.
Okay. And, notes here.
And we can prepare an updated appropriation ordinance draft and ARPA plan draft for the council that reflects everything the committee has
Can-
decided on today.
Can we have that by Friday so that counselors have the weekend to digest?
Yes. Cindy and I talked about making sure that
Perfect.
it
The
was-
sooner the
it was-
better.
It was there on
Yeah.
time, so it is my top priority tomorrow.
Perfect. And then Cindy, we need to communicate to the clerk treasurer's office to add this to the, it's already on the agenda,
It's
is
on
it
the
not?
Mhm.
Perfect.
It is on the
Okay.
agenda, so it will just be an update for
Nice.
the plan. Okay, wait, so we have a motion and a second, so just to be formal here,
Sorry.
I'll call that roll. Okay, Scott,
Yes.
Misha, and me, yes. Okay. No one happened to jump on the call.
Troy's in
they?
California. He just texted me and said he's out today, so.
Okay. So it is just the three of us, so that did pass, and we will send that on to council.
The plot really, plot would thicken there if Scott says no. 2-1. We have a split of the committee.
This is too easy. No.
One of the other things I was really wanting to do here was figure out this public outreach plan, and now that we have a little bit more to go on,
Yep.
granted, we still have this overarching 3011 kind of thing out there, but,
So, Cindy, I'll just throw this out there too. I hate to take up people's time in the evening and stuff, but if you ever want to block off an hour one night in the evening for an informal public meeting, Dustin and I would be happy to come up, run through the PowerPoint, run through some general questions of the public. If that puts more pressure on you guys, then don't worry about it. But, you know, we've committed to be a partner in all this, so.
thank you, that's so helpful, because, I mean, obviously, we're not attorneys, and
No,
people
yeah,
will
for
always
sure.
have questions. Our biggest thing is trying to find out the best way to reach people here.
For sure. And so if it is through if it is gonna be a 3.5-hour training, just generally, if we can come up one night and field questions and, very informal, we could run through that PowerPoint, 15 minutes, and kind of hit the buckets of what the act allows, and then answer some specific questions. If it would be beneficial, we'll be here.
Well, and the beautiful part of it is this was recorded, and so
Yep.
we'll be able to refer people who
Post.
are interested in
That's
this
right,
to
perfect.
this recording, so I think that is gonna help.
And if you want to post the PowerPoint, we wouldn't care about that either. You
Yeah.
could refer people to that PowerPoint.
Well, that is handy too, thank you for the offer.
That's right.
We will work on that.
Yeah.
And I'm going to steal some of your slides for a town hall
Totally.
meeting I got coming up in January,
Perfect.
or not January, December, so.
That's right, totally.
So likely, we're gonna schedule at least one, I would think, separate public meeting about this, where we actually, get out there and get our communications department to try and work with us on that. But also, I'm wondering if we're gonna need to have some stakeholder kind of meetings, because I'm guessing there's gonna be questions from these people who might be applying, or who have ideas that we have not considered yet, so.
For sure.
We might need to have those additional, but at least I want to have a strategy moving forward. And I know other communities have had separate websites, they've had, these whole text tree kind of things,
Oh,
ways
yeah.
to engage, and we're not quite set up like that here for something as grand as that, if you will, in a communication style. So I'm kind of needing to talk with our communications director, but if we could at least get one meeting set up, I'd at least feel better about it. And I'm gonna do something probably inappropriate, wildly inappropriate. Linda Nass, you are in the audience today. Can I ask your opinion as a resident here, but also someone who's engaged in most everything in this community? What day and time is probably best
Yeah.
Mhm.
This is Tuesday afternoon,
Yeah.
but Wednesdays are usually taken, Mondays are always taken by the meetings.
Tuesday.
I think Tuesday's appropriate.
Yeah.
So probably
Thursdays are
Tuesday
bad.
at 7.
Yeah, get you off the weekend, you're not too thinking about the next one.
Yeah.
Possibly Thursday if we need another option, I would think.
Um,
You don't run into as many athletic events either.
Right.
On Tuesday.
That's the kind of stuff I'm just never sure about.
Yeah.
Church events usually are on Tuesday.
Mid-American Conference.
But we're also running into the holiday season, which complicates things.
When you've got like Lions Club, Kiwanis, they tend to meet on Thursdays.
Operation Football.
I think Tuesday's probably your best day.
So should we consider one in early December, or is that too early?
If
I
we're
mean, in
ready,
terms of
I don't think
prepping
it's,
for it?
I think it's, I think it's an appropriate time if we can be ready for it, yeah.
And I don't have my phone on me. I'm wondering about the second Tuesday in December?
Let me look.
Yep.
That'll be the 14th. I am in town and available.
I almost hate doing anything in the month of December, because it seems like people are,
Perfect. Can, head back.
Everybody's in good moods in December. That's a
That's right.
great time to
Head
have
back
a
after the
meeting.
meeting, hit the fashion mall, get a couple things done.
Or we could serve hot chocolate cookies.
There you go.
There you
There you go.
Linda, you volunteering to make those?
God, you guys are gonna be the most popular elected officials of all time, right? This is great.
Too bad our little log cabin hasn't been built. We could have had a little event out there.
probably this venue is gonna be the best, because it can be recorded, and I think that's helpful for that. Okay, so we are gonna run into a problem though, because that is BZA. I don't know if they have items on the agenda for that yet, but that would be our issue, and most people travel the week after that.
Yeah.
So the only other Tuesday then would be December 7th.
That can, Dustin, would be,
That doesn't give us a whole lot of time for noticing and marketing and,
December 7th?
I guess,
I have a conflict, I got student impact. I'm on their board of directors. We
Oh,
got a meeting
okay.
that night. I mean, I could probably work around it.
You move these meetings.
no, we can't move those BZA meetings. No.
what time is the BZA? Sorry.
7.
Okay.
We could do the
Do.
Wednesday the
do earlier.
15th.
Oh, okay. We could do earlier in the day. I could do 4:30.
I could do 4 or 5.
Well, but for the public, I mean, we'd want to
Oh.
make sure they're
Yeah.
We could do
available to
5,
be there.
5:30, and then be out of here by
How long is it gonna be? Think.
1 hour. Are you talking about what our talk thing? 1 hour. We give 15 minutes to go through the slides, and most of these things are gonna be question-based. We can talk all night, but most of these times.
If we pushed it to later in the evening, say 7 or 7:30, I could be there for that. I could be
On
there.
which day?
On the 14th, the 7th. I can't, earlier is a challenge for me, but later in the evening, I could be there.
Were you guys okay with the 7th?
I've been to Austin.
I mean, I have my minion, Mike, and my associate, Veronica.
There you
So
go.
we could-
So minions got minions?
I know,
Man.
I know. He keeps asking me. He's like, can I come to Westfield? And I'm like, and I'm like, they'll think,
Everybody wants to be in
I would say,
Westfield.
Right.
they'll think that I'm too powerful if I bring my own minion to
powerful.
meetings. They were like, does
You
every
undersold
second, does
yourself.
every second year associate at the firm get their own minion? Is that how it works? It's like the beginning of Pokemon. It's dangerous out there. Take this. Like,
That works too, so 7.
I'm going to tentatively say right now, Tuesday, December 7th. I would prefer that 14th, and if I could talk to Kevin, there are some times that the BZA does not need to meet. And so if that was the case, I'd prefer to actually
Totally.
have it
No.
then, but,
That would be a better
We'll hold
day.
it.
okay.
Yep, regardless, and just let us know how outside of being on the school board, the Board of Zoning Appeals is probably the least favorite job that I would ever want, but it's okay.
If it's December 7th, would you guys prefer 6 or 7?
either side.
Only because it's probably most consistent with everything else we do, 7 o'clock's probably best bet there. Okay,
Okay.
so I will get you guys information as soon as possible on that and secure the meeting room and how we go about getting that notice to the public.
Great.
Because I might need your assistance with that part.
Okay.
Do I? I think I do.
I don't,
It's not a formal.
I guess I don't know that you have a statutory requirement.
Yeah,
for-
it would just be actually telling the public they could come to this.
Okay.
As opposed to like a formal, you would be violating the open door law or something like that. That doesn't apply to
Okay.
this kind of deal.
So there's no limit on the number of counselors that can participate as well, be at the event?
Yeah, so, let me think about that. So it would be an informational session. So no, you're not taking any official action or having discussions related to that, so anybody could show that
Perfect.
that wanted to.
Okay,
We would be giving the presentation, so.
okay.
Sure. Yeah.
Yes, Linda?
Does that include matching payroll taxes and any PERF?
I think yes.
Yeah.
I think the answer to that is
Would
yes.
have to be in the 196,500?
So, So I'm gonna answer your question without getting in too much into the weeds. The money can be used for that. I have no idea how to calculate perf and that kind of stuff, but it can be.
You probably wouldn't have it available anywhere else this year.
No, yeah.
Okay.
That's a great question. Is that taxed? So if we're doing a $1,500 bonus, is that taxed?
It's payroll.
So it's part of
Yeah,
payroll?
it's pay.
Okay,
Payroll.
Yeah.
Pay everything on it, and that
Uncle
could be
Sam's gotta get-
50%.
that's right.
Uncle Sam's
Well,
gotta get,
not totally, it wouldn't be 15, so we don't match anything, yeah.
it'd be high.
It'd be considerable, yes.
Yeah.
So, we
But-
can consider that.
That's out of your hands. That's Uncle Sam, you know, so,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, stinks.
That would have been there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Uncle Sam gives you money, gives you your own money back, and then taxes it
Taxes it.
again. Gotta love it.
Scott, I've got a deal for you.
Yeah, no,
That's right.
So I will be interested in finding out more about this application, draft application thing that you guys said you're coming up with,
Totally, yeah.
because obviously that's critical for me. And when I was really trying to think about this and how it was gonna play out, I'm very concerned that it's gonna be burdensome on these folks. When I look at the people who make up a lot of these organizations, they're already volunteers, and they're not, tasked with doing this kind of thing normally, so I'm,
Fair.
yeah, and so I'm just hoping that it's doable for them in applying.
We'll do the best we can,
I realize it's a balancing act because we
because
have
we
to
gotta have the
safeguard
legal
everything.
justification,
right.
right? So that we can stuff it, in a file and make us comfortable with what they're gonna use the dollars for, because frankly, we're not all gonna be there, right? So we're gonna rely on as we should, and justifiably so, rely on the application and their, their information that they provide, but we'll try to balance it. We'll cut it very nicely, I think, that it's something they've seen before, but it gives some reasons and some details, so.
Mhm. Okay. And we will talk with Jeremy and his team further about the infrastructure. I mean, with that being kind of a separate thing that's
Yeah.
solely with Jeremy's division,
That's
so.
right, yep.
Okay.
Let us know if he has any direct questions too. Shoot us an email or whatever.
Will do.
Yeah.
We need to schedule some future meetings. We have one right now scheduled for December 15th, but we don't have anything on the calendar past that. And so I realized originally we said we were going to meet every 2 weeks, and that just seemed kind of a lot to get anything done.
Yeah.
And with so much stuff changing, so we moved to monthly. So we'd be looking at January. Originally, we were doing the Friday afternoons, but that changed these past 2 months. So does the committee have any thoughts about what dates they would like to be meeting?
So Friday's tough just because it's the only day the General Assembly's not. I would rather do during the week in the afternoons. That helps me a little bit because Friday I have all these legislative calls that I have to
Oh,
do
okay.
with clients on
Mhm.
legislative issues at the General Assembly.
Okay,
So like Tuesdays or Wednesdays, whatever you guys feel is, better, or Thursdays, I don't care. Whatever works better. Fridays are tough for me during the General Assembly, because we
Okay.
do our legislative update stuff.
sure. How about you, Scott?
well, the first and last week of January, I'm pretty much out for the Marine Corps.
Okay,
But then I'm wide open the 2 weeks in the middle, the week of the 10th and the week of the 17th.
Misha, do you have any specific commitments?
No, January is, I will be very, very busy to try to closing year end, so I just pick any dates and was not good days for me.
Well, and we don't have Troy and John on the phone now, so
Any days,
I'm gonna take a stab here and say, Wednesday, January 19th.
Wide open, all day.
Okay. Does that look okay for you guys at, say, 2 o'clock?
Sure.
2 o'clock?
Yep.
And if we could get a February one in there too, at least for now, I'd feel better. And if we're gonna stick with a similar, we could look at February 16th, Wednesday, February 16th.
Cool.
Yes, let's get those on the calendar, so at
Works
least
for me
we have
too.
those days. Okay, so unfortunately for Troy, I don't know where that sits with Troy, but we'll have to
We can always
figure-
change it if he's,
Yes, okay, so January 19th at 2 o'clock and February 16th at 2 o'clock. All right, everybody.
Thank you.
I can't thank you enough for all your help on this,
Absolutely.
guys. You've been incredible, and now we seem like we have some momentum to get working.
Absolutely.
So thank you
Looking
so
forward
much.
to it.
thank you.
Yep.
With
Thank
all
you.
that, I'll have a motion to adjourn. Who's gonna second?
I second that.
Thank you. Motion is second. All in favor? Aye. Yay.
Great job, Cindy, appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, guys.
Good job, gents. Appreciate the help and support.
You better add these in now.
Yes, sir. See you guys. Have a
Thank
good
you
rest of
so
your day.
much, and get some sleep.
I will. Hang it in there.
Enjoy.